If you could just say like your name, a little bit about yourself,
Okay.
Where you grew up,
Okay.
and anything that you want to share as an intro to yourself before we
Okay.
get started to the really deep questions.
Cool.
Yeah.
Do I need to spell my name?
No.
Like so? Okay.
No, that's right.
So my name is Sammie Jo Rambawa, and my pronouns are she and her. And right now, I'm 40 years old, born on November 1st, Araw ng Patay, as they call it in the Philippines. And I was actually born in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And my mom is actually from Las Piñas in the Philippines. And my dad is actually from Caloocan, but his parents are from, I guess, Ilocos Norte, like Pasukin. That's where his mom is from, or his mom and dad are from. And I guess with my parents living in Winnipeg, we actually moved to Vancouver because of the fact that my dad got laid off from his job there. But before we made the transition to making Vancouver our home, we actually spent 6 months in the Philippines. And kind of did a little bit of schooling there for 6 months, me and my sisters. And so I guess the intro for myself being in Vancouver since 1990 is just I've always been involved in the Filipino community in regards to participating in Filipino Independence Day with a hip hop dance group. That's kind of how I really got immersed with the Filipino community and with the entertainment, having friends that are dancers and hip hoppers and DJs and all that stuff. So I actually started off doing all ages events here.
Cool.
It's like so much more. But yeah, it was really like kind of like, you know, a little bit of a hip hop saved my life, where my best friend's sister was a choreographer, and they actually held dance classes at Collingwood Neighborhood Houses. Collingwood Neighborhood House. And so we just danced, and we wanted to perform for people, and so I was like 16 and be like, let's book a hall and let's do competitions and all that stuff. So that was really like the start of even my event productions and stuff.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Auntie Sammie. But yeah, I mean, I didn't even know that you grew up in Winnipeg, so that's super cool. When did you move to Van, or like when did you have that 6-month period of being in the Philippines?
Like when? I mean, I remember Vanelli, my youngest sister Vanelli, was still really young. So even when going to the Philippines, she was still just 6 months. So by the time she was 1 year old, like here in July, like because her birthday's in July, that would be in the summer of like 1991, I should say, moving to Vancouver. But we moved around a lot. Like we first actually landed in Burnaby, and throughout my time here in Vancouver, I actually went to like 7 elementary schools and 4 high schools. And that was the point of like trying to always find a cheaper rent. And then my mom became a single mom, so that was where we were always trying to find a house that was close to the school so we could just do the whole walking distance thing. And my mom ended up being a single mom and just having to work like 2 full-time jobs, and having like my grandfather and my 2 aunts like help raise us. And my Lolo Pablo is actually who I named my son after, because we were like super close.
Awesome. Yeah, can I ask like what that was like for you? Because I think Winnipeg has a lot of Filipinos, right? So what was it like for you, I guess, like in all the ways that you've moved, like to go from Winnipeg to the Philippines and then to Vancouver? What was that like journey like for you? Well, that you can remember.
It was interesting because, of course, when you go from Winnipeg to the Philippines and then you're speaking Tagalog and you're listening to it, I remember I was always speaking English in class, and that's in the school in the Philippines. They kind of encourage that, right? We're like the English-speaking, balikbayans in the school, because my mom just had a friend who was a teacher, so she let us in the school, and we took tests or whatever. But I remember coming back to Canada, Kimberly, my second sister, was put into an ELL class, and I wasn't. And my mom was just like, they're Canadian born, like why does she need to be in an English learning class? And it was just the fact that she just spoke more Tagalog, or she just didn't pass the test of like that ELL. And so we were just like, okay, that's kind of weird, but you know, it is what it is. But even coming to Vancouver, there was not that many Filipino, like coming to BC, there wasn't that many Filipinos in the schools at that time anyways. And so I think, you know, that whole transition of being like, okay, we're back in Canada, which is cool, but we were always striving for like that Filipino-ness, like wanting, you know, we were lucky that my parents, you know, cooked Filipino food, but we were always like looking for those, you know, things like the markets or just the stores and everything. So, and then having, you know, that time of living in Vancouver, Surrey, Richmond, you know, you kind of saw more of the Filipinos in Richmond because that's where most of the Chinese Filipino restaurants were, or stores were even. But, you know, like I said, thank goodness for those independent days that every, you know, Filipino Independence Day celebration, that's kind of where we'd gather, and I would tell all my friends, like, this is where we go. And in schools, there was not that many Filipinos in schools, but because of dance, a lot of Filipinos ended up joining us in dance, and I ended up like really being friends with a lot of private school kids, and that were Filipino, because in the public school they weren't there. Like it was mostly non-Filipinos at that time, my early age.
Yeah. That's so interesting. Like going from like Winnipeg, which I'm assuming that you saw like a lot more Filipinos and family, and then moving to Vancouver, where you're kind of like moving in different areas and like looking for that Filipino community. How did you, like, since there weren't a lot of like Filipinos in public schools, you kind of already talked about hip hop dance. Like, how did you end up getting involved in the community at such a young age when there wasn't as many Filipinos that you could see present in Vancouver at that time?
Yeah. I mean, I could remember, even in grade 6, like in Surrey. So I was, you know, I just remember my best friend, like she's my best friend since today. She literally came up, she's like, are you Filipino? Because like there was literally only 3 Filipinos in our Surrey elementary school, Panorama Park. And so when I was like, yeah, I'm Filipino, and she's like, yeah, me too. And she happened to live 2 doors down from me. And so with that, it was, her family was already immersed in the Filipino community, where her mom was like the president of Gimilami Association, and so I would go with her to her events, and she was like in the Santa Cruz, like she was like her mom's association was doing the whole Gimilami thing and the whole Santa Cruzan, so being a princess and all that stuff, so I'd like tag along. But really, when we started our hip hop dance group, you know, our choreographer was already performing in those Independence Day at Plaza of Nations. And so that was kind of like the point of like, let's get all our friends to come watch us and perform. And so, you know, I think there was also some other folks that we knew, and they started a TV show called Mango Vibe, like a long time ago. And it was literally like featuring like Filipinos that were doing things, because we had a lot of friends that were like dancers and DJs, and we just wanted to feature them and let the world know about like how talented they are. And so I have a friend named Boom Dayupai, and he used to be in a singing group in Vancouver, and he went back and forth to the Philippines too, and he's a like film director and stuff. And so he really kind of showed how to like display our arts and culture and talent on film and video. And so there was also a calendar that he produced to do a fundraiser, and my older cousin was in it. And so it literally was like a calendar. I don't even know what it was fundraising for or whatever, but it just featured all the Filipino cool teenagers, because I was like 13 at the time, and they were like all like 17, 18, and they were just like the cool older
like
Filipino.
Tumblr kind of, but not at the time, but like kind of.
Yeah, it was just, I don't even know if there were even like singers or dancers, or mostly dancers, but like again, my cousin was like one of the models for it and stuff, and so it was just like a fun thing for them to do. So I remember that.
That's so cool.
But like I said, the Plaza of Nation days were like the times where like all the Filipinos would come from different schools, and that's where we would really gather.
So it's like cross-school events.
Yeah, and so at that time too, those back in the day, that's when, I don't know if they still do them right now, but we were allowed to go to their high school, like, you know, when St. Pat's or even STM or Notre Dame, they had their dances, like, us public school kids would, like, join them. And, again, like, Notre Dame, we would compete at Notre Dame competitions and kind of all meet there and stuff. So really, dance really brought out all the Filipino kids.
Yeah, and that's definitely still evident today too.
Yeah.
So that's so cute. That makes my heart so warm.
Yeah, it's so awesome.
Yeah. So I guess like because of all these events, you kind of like got connected and were able to get involved from such an early age, which is so awesome.
Yeah.
Do you think that's like really like influenced for how you are like right now, like in navigating like your Filipino-ness in Vancouver?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, if there was a performance or people needed like dancers or singers, I would be the one that they would call up because they would all be my friends. And of course, it was like all volunteer work because we were just like, we just want to be on stage. We just want to have fun. And I think because I went to so many schools, I was able to adapt to my environment, but I really attribute my networking skills, but also just my relationship building to the fact that I moved so many schools. Of course, I'm like upset as a little kid, but I was that always a new girl. Like every year, my yearbook would say like, "Oh, we'll miss you," kind of thing. But it just allowed me to like keep in touch with some folks. And of course, it's so hard because you meet so many people, and it's hard to keep in touch with everybody. But at that time, I always found like even from Winnipeg, like somebody from my kindergarten class had moved to Vancouver, and they would remember me, being like, "You were in my class, like in kindergarten." We like legit met in Surrey in high school, and be like, "Oh my God, that's so crazy." So I think like lasting, like a lasting impression and being memorable, but also like people remember like you as a person. I think that's what's always important because people, you become top of mind. So when there's like, oh, we need like, you know, spoken word artists, or me and my sisters are just like those natural networkers, but just connectors. Because legit, if someone was like, we need a clown for a birthday party, we're like, yeah, we know a clown, or like, you know, a face painter. We would always just like recommend and refer people because we want to promote our people and just like the people that we know that are talented. So I think referrals for sure had allowed me to be the person who I am today, to kind of have those relationships that I can always go back to or ask for favors, or they ask me for a favor. And it also helps that I ended up becoming like a club promoter. So taking my all ages events and doing, and then becoming like 19, like I ended up being a club promoter. And of course, where are we all going? Where all the Filipinos that are singing and dancing are wanting to go to the nightclub. So when I was one of the first hip hop female promoters, I wanted a safe space. Like I wanted a place where we could dance and just have a good time, and I'd be the guest list girl. People would always have to call me, and I would have to have their first and last name, and I would always be booking birthday parties and stuff.
That's so funny.
So it's kind of like, you know, when I do see people or they remember me, they're just like, yeah, you did my birthday party, or yeah, you got us into the club. Like those little memories kind of are the ones that you get to kind of like laugh about a little bit.
Building community throughout all ages.
And now we're all like parents and be like, yeah, we used to party so much. And then now we're all like moms and dads and being like, oh, those were the days. Which mind you, like people are still, you know, wanting and striving for. But I guess it's like phases, right? Because you know, that time when we were just doing the clubbing and just, you know, no kids or just going to college. And then now we're at that phase where like, whoa, we have kids and we want to teach them about Tagalog, you know, Tagalog or our public figures in the Philippines, like our heroes kind of thing. So that's where it kind of transformed of like what my goal was in regards to like promoting Filipino-ness or even just being proud. And I think being involved and being invited to certain tables that had those discussions, I always found myself as the only Filipino on there, you know, and I'm just like looking around the table being like, okay, I'm the only Filipino here. I'm glad that I'm here, but there should be more. But I'm always happy to kind of represent.
So I really want to like hone in on how you've been in Vancouver for a long time. Like you've been here since 1990. You've really like witnessed like the community grow in so many ways, and like all these different phases, like with the people that you grew up with. Like you mentioned, like you were like 16, and then like now you're like of legal age and you're partying, and now you're adults. And so kind of just like an open question, like for you, like what is it like being Filipino Canadian in Greater Vancouver? You can answer that in whatever phases or however you like. It's a big question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, what is it like to be Filipino Canadian in BC? I mean, I wouldn't be anything else. I'm honored, I'm proud, I'm really just, one of those Filipinos that just strive for their history and culture to be promoted and elevated and uplifted. And for me, sorry, I keep on touching the mic. Because I was able to go back and forth to the Philippines at such an early age and young age, because my parents wanted us to always keep in touch with my grandparents there, I always felt the need to come back to represent, like almost like an obligation to tell the stories of the Filipino people there. And I know that in 2010, I ended up doing a house building project, which was with Inspire Foundation, which was the first nonprofit organization that I volunteered for. And then I ended up getting the chance to be the Bulacan project coordinator. And so I was the lead person to take 15 Canadians to the Philippines to experience like all levels of the Philippines. Like I'm talking like the good, the bad, the ugly. And we went to a community there, Bagong Silang, to build houses there. Although we didn't build the house, we just kind of dug the septic tank. Yeah. But that trip, even though I've been to the Philippines so many times, we were able to go to like the places where people lived in stilt houses, people lived in the cemetery, and there were things that I was really thinking that I wanted to help the Philippines, whether it was promoting the culture, whether it's bringing people there to promote the tourism there. And that was actually when I when I actually decided to kind of quit my corporate job to kind of go into nonprofit, to kind of really immerse myself in the Filipino community. And I got my first job as 2011 as a youth worker at the Multicultural Helping House. It was only part-time. I literally got paid like $10 an hour or something like that.
It was a
multicultural helping house. Yeah.
Could you tell me a bit more about that?
Well, it was 2011. It's on Fraser Street in 32nd, and it was really a settlement services place, but they had respite housing as well. And Tatay Tom Abendaño was the CEO, and basically had that organization to help the Filipino community. They had a Filipino name before, but had to change it in regards to funding purposes for the federals. And so what I did as a youth worker is that we would be going into the schools that are nearby, which is like John Oliver, David Thompson, Tupper, and we would do lunchtime programs and after school programs. And that was when we did our NEAS classes for the youth, and we participated in parades, and whether it was the Christmas parade or the summertime parade or the Pinoy festival, we just kind of had that youth group, which was called Remix. It was really fun. And so we even did Halloween dances. And so I was closely working with immigrant youth or children of live-in caregivers, and really seeing the stories of the reunification, because these are children who have been separated from their moms for like 7-10 years, and really having that struggle to fitting in, or even just adjusting to Canadian life, or even adjusting to their newfound home. So that's when I really could see how our community, like our Filipino youth, were kind of being brought up in our society and really trying to find a place to like belong. And for me, as a Canadian Filipino in school, there was that divide where you could see the newcomers and the Canadian borns where they weren't really meshing, but because I was speaking Tagalog to them, they were like good with me. Like I was able to kind of like bridge that gap. And so that's why I found those Filipino Independence Days were so awesome, because that literally bridged the gap with Canadian Filipinos and newcomer Filipinos, that it was a common place that they could actually, you know, get together and just eat the same food and watch the same entertainment and kind of get it, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's super. That's like awesome. So many threads to touch on.
Yeah, pick one.
I guess, like, if you could share a little bit more about, you know, kind of witnessing, like, through Independence Days, like, how that brought together generations, and what was, like, for you as a second gen to, like, kind of, like, witness that. I guess I'm just really curious because, like, what were Independence Days like back then? Like, if, like, basically, like, that reminiscing.
Yeah.
Like, what was it like? Yeah.
It literally was like one event at Plaza of Nations, and you didn't have, like, Surrey, New West, like, Coquitlam, like, the municipalities. It was literally, like, one Independence Day where all the Filipino booths or vendors will just be there. And so it was a weekend to remember, to kind of get to gather. And and the thing is, though, people or, like, our friends would just perform. Like, we'd watch our friends, and, you know, there'd be a mix. Of course, there's hip hop there, and there's a mix of Filipino artists that are local and then international. I think the big draws are always the Filipino artists that come from the Philippines, and that's when people are, like, starstruck to like see, you know, back in the day. But I think, you know, it's just so interesting because there's a lot of Filipino were in the hip hop industry, like DJs, like we have international renowned DJs, and then dance groups that have won championships and everything. And so, you know, when we would watch them perform, everybody would just support and go. Like, there was no question of that. And now, yes, of course, we're still doing that. Like, when people end up becoming, like, going on, like, American Idol or whatever, we'll still support. But I think there's just no one, not that there's one person that's responsible for that, but back in the day, I can remember too, like in 2009 when there was that Typhoon Undoy. So I was already doing Inspire Foundation, and Typhoon Undoy came up, and people were like, "What do we do?" And I'm like, "I don't know. What do we do?" And people were calling me and people at Inspire Foundation, being like, "Should we do a fundraiser?" Like, people are asking what they should do, and I was just like, "Well." Yes, I wasn't even working at Multicultural Helping Hands at that time, but they had offered to do, like, buy-in boxes, and it was, and then I ended up being, like, the touch point person, being like, you know, where should we donate funds? We have clothes, you know, who's the trusted organization? And so me and my friends, we just ended up being like, okay, well, Multicultural Helping House is the Filipino place, like, we can use their garage or storage to bring items. And then we had a friend also that owned a studio, Box Studios, on Franklin Street, and, like, let's just do an event. So literally, like, Filipinos donated art to auction off. You know, Boom to Yupay did a music video about the typhoon. People donated money, and so we ended up raising like $10,000, and then additional $10,000 worth of goods. And, like, those dance groups, like those hip hop dance groups and DJs, they donated their time to DJ. They performed, promoted, and it was just, like, an amazing feeling because it was one of the first times that the Filipino community actually got together to do something. And it was reactionary, of course, because you see your country on the news being like this devastation. And so that was when we started, oh my gosh, I don't even know how many years now, but we started the fundraiser called Salamat. So Salamat was the fundraiser done by Inspire Foundation to help with the Typhoon Undoy, but also help every year to give back to the Philippines. And so, again, those were all friends and family who just donated their time and talent. You know, it wasn't about the money or anything. They just wanted to, like, be involved. And so that was when, you know, I started a Vancouver Filipino, like, Facebook group. It started off with all just friends, and then after, when those events came, they're just like, oh, well, you should just open it up. So that Vancouver Filipino group on Facebook just grew, and people asking questions about where to find this, where can I find a barong, where can I find a community that, Filipinos that like hiking. But it was a lot of, again, people from the Philippines asking how to immigrate to Canada. Like there was a lot of, immigrant consulting questions. And so it was a test base of like, information, but there was so much inquiry. Like it was really hard to manage from people.
Is it still live?
It's still on. I've gotten some volunteers to help me.
Yeah.
But it has transformed into really an information seeking place where people can like a peer-to-peer kind of thing, because there's a lot of people looking for housing and just questions and what to do and everything. So because we don't have a Filipino cultural center, dropping a line.
We'll address that later.
that was the place to ask, right? And that's why there's so much opportunity to help people, and I think there's several trust issues with that too, because it's like, who do you believe, especially with immigrant consultants? Not to say that there are, that industry is bad or anything, but it's just that's the level, because people will pay the money to get their family over, to cut the process, or to even just make sure that paperwork is right, because so many people just get that one mistake and that whole application is ruined.
It's high stakes.
And it's nerve-wracking, right? It's super nerve-wracking. So I feel for them. So I guess, just like, again, I just end up getting all those inquiries, like random inquiries of asking for an immigrant consultant, from asking, what's the best place to, buy pancit or something like that. Yeah.
I have an answer to that.
Have you?
But oh my gosh, Sammie Jo, there's so much.
I know.
Like I think for me, like I'm second gen, but like grew up in Vancouver my entire life, and only like basically the last year of the 90s. Like it's so cool for me to hear what being a Filipino was like in Vancouver, like in the 90s. And hearing that, and I think it's super like touching to see like Filipinos and their Facebook, like how savvy it is to actually use it as a connection platform, as a way to like build community connections, inquiry, like whatever is needed. Like that mutual aid piece is so huge, and I feel like that's really common, like despite like what political beliefs or where you're at, like people will come together when it comes to like mutual aid and supporting. And so I guess like going way back to what you mentioned earlier for like this portion, we have time, like with Inspire and like setting up that fundraiser, and how you mentioned like you feel that sense of obligation to come back, tell these stories like from the Philippines, or like that sense of obligation to like be that touch point and like be that person in the community, and like how like in like spaces like you were like the only Filipino person, and like really pushing for Filipino-ness in Vancouver. Like could you speak more to that, like that sense of obligation of being that person?
I know, it's like, I don't know how it happened, or like, no one told me, or it's like, I know I have a voice, and I know I'm not afraid to talk, and even like, I know I'm a natural promoter. And so, and sometimes I don't say the right things, and sometimes I say whatever is on my mind, and I think that's what people appreciate.
You're human.
Because totally human, and totally just asking questions, and I get in trouble for them. Like, when I'm asking too many questions, or if I'm just making a comment, I think it was just really like questioning, why can't we talk about this? Like, one of the things that I'll say from back in the day is that the only Filipino group that was kind of talking about the Philippines, I guess the Philippines politics, or just the group of Filipinos that were doing things. Let's say, for example, if you weren't talking about hip hop or just dancing or singing, there was a group of Filipinos from the Kalayaan Center that were actually talking about the politics. And that's where a lot of us had met as well, because there was a Philippine Women's Center in the downtown east side called the Kalayaan Center. And that was where we met a lot of the folks who did art, who did spoken word, that talked about the politics in the Philippines and the political refugees. And for me, when I ask my parents stuff like this, they don't want to talk about it. And so I'm just like, okay, I've been to the Philippines, like, I go to these things, but I was never allowed to go to UP, or I was never allowed to, like, when I've asked about EDSA, like those political histories, my parents didn't want to go there. And so I was curious and I was hungry for that. And so, when you think about being in Canada and it's a multicultural society, and we see all the Filipinos working in industries, you just kind of want to get to know, like, what their stories are or where they came from. And then, once you start that conversation with the 70-year-old that works at McDonald's, you're just like, oh my gosh, you worked as that in the Philippines? Like, you were a political prisoner at that time? Like, and people come to Canada for a better life, for sure. And I know whenever I go back to the Philippines, my cousins are just always like, oh, you're so lucky, there's this. But, there are other things and struggles that we have to go through with racism, with wages, and just what we do. And they don't understand that because they just see a life that's better than them. But, when it comes to it, when we go to the Philippines, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, you guys are literally like, living a life with happiness and with your family and no worries. Of course, there's the problems there too, but it's kind of like we do stress out a lot in Canada. But it's just kind of like two different perspectives. So that's why I'm always so torn when I go to the Philippines, because you get your cousins and families that ask for money, that think that you have a lot of money, and you're just like, no.
Yeah, it's like my dad's like, yeah, can you just donate to your cousin? And I'm like,
well, this is the thing though too, with not even just about the typhoon, but just like, oh, your cousins need money to go to school, or there's not enough rice. And me and my other friends and families always contemplate about, like, are we enabling them, or how do we do this? Because we do have more than them, but yet, like, is this a cycle of, do we plan to just keep on giving? Because that's the problem with a lot of the families, like the overseas workers, the temporary foreign workers, because they're trying to provide here for themselves, but yet they are sending their money back home to the Philippines to provide there, right? So it's really tough. So again, with the good, the bad, and the ugly, like, I totally embrace it. I'm not trying to say like the Filipinos are the best out of all the Asians or whatnot, because we obviously do have our own problems there. But it's kind of like, how do we embrace all of that and kind of celebrate that, especially when the political climate was so crazy, when people were really noticing. And our politics kind of got on the mainstream media. I think our politics, or maybe I was just too young to pay attention then, but I think in the recent years, the politics kind of got in the mainstream media.
Yeah. So, at the Sammie Jo, what is it like being a leader in the Filipino community? Specifically, what is it like responding to, like, crises or building organizations? Like, what is that like for you?
I feel, I do feel the sense of responsibility to answer those inquiries. Of course, it's not that I'm going to solve everything myself. Like, I do really reach out to the community to really put the questions out there and the need. And what I find that's really great is that I don't have to do it by myself. Like, that's the beauty of it, is that when you're a community organizer, you have all these different resources to tap on, and people that want to help. And it's just the capacity to actually do the work. And most of it, again, is labor of love. Like, it literally is people that are doing it on their own time. And so I remember the time during COVID, where everybody didn't know what was happening or what to do, and going to the grocery shops were, like, really limited. And my sisters and I, we do own a wedding coordination company, and we were halted at all of our weddings. And it was a very busy time for us as well. But my sister Vinelli, who took the lead on this project, she remembers going to a grocery shop and seeing elders kind of lining up for food, but knowing that they're immune compromised, or their mobility is limited. And then me telling her stories about single parents, as I'm a single parent, how they're very limited. And then, of course, because I worked at Multicultural Helping House and Mount Pleasant Neighborhood House, I kept in touch with a lot of the Filipino seniors that were out of there and that were using our programs and services there. And so they were calling for questions and kind of wanting some clarifications and telling me that they don't know how that they can go for groceries or their kids can't help them or whatnot. And so it was a decision that we as sisters and other friends, got together to be like, hey, let's do COVID care packages. And not just like packages that would be very superficial or very just like canned foods that are just not relatable. We did choose to give to Filipino seniors, to single parents, immune compromised folks. And so it literally was a community effort where we reached out to our friends that had Filipino stores like Aling Mary's. They donated pandesal. The consulate's office donated rice and bangos. And these is like comfort food, and we got Spam and lots of farmers like donated fruit. And we ended up raising like about $6,000. So another fundraising effort, like $6,000 in funds. And then, I think we distributed over like 3,000 bags. And people were all volunteering, and you feel that sense of community, and really the whole effort is just somebody delegating tasks or just kind of telling people the information. And it was great. A lot of people nominated people. People were self-nominating. People were nominating others, being like, hey, this family could use a care package and all that stuff. And so, that was what created that COVID Filipino outreach Facebook page, another avenue for more information. And even with that, with Tulayan, of course, Tulayan was involved in that. During COVID, Tulayan also got involved with translation of like giving the information with a Filipino doctor. We did a presentation with a Filipino doctor that spoke in Tagalog and English to kind of explain what COVID was. And then, what was it? We found that we had to translate information from the government ourselves because, again, Filipino seniors, Filipino families were just not understanding, the medical or like the government information that was coming out. So that volunteer effort got the attention of Hua Foundation that ended up becoming C19, which was translating information to, simplified Chinese, traditional Chinese, Vietnamese, and Tagalog. Yeah, that's so I was a part awesome. Of that.
Yes, as of course you were.
Yeah.
And could you speak a little bit more about Tulayan and why that was formed and, what you were up to with the organization?
So Tulayan, again, got together with a group of friends, and, there was a group that wanted to have a Tagalog book club. It was literally like, hey, you're Filipino, let's do a Filipino book club. And then there was other ideas. Why don't we do a Filipino movie night or like Tagalog lessons? And I think the whole Tagalog lessons was really the launch of what we wanted to do, because we found when we launched, again, Tulayan means to bridge. And so when we found and asked the community what they were looking for, the Tagalog lessons was really one of the things. And people were replying to us saying that they want to talk to their Lola in the Philippines. They want to be able to talk to their in-laws. And these were inquiries not just from Filipino people, but they were just from non-Filipino people who married into or had a relationship. And, there was a lot of half Filipino folks that had, intercultural families that were really looking for their culture and heritage. And I find that, again, my parents didn't really tell me about the history or political things in the Philippines because they avoided it for a good reason, let's say. But it's still a question on like, how did the Philippines become the way they were, or what's the political divide, or what's the difference between this region and region, because there's some infighting in there. And so we did, along with the Tagalog classes, we did Pinoy story time to kind of do a little bit of an introduction on like like a hero series, a cultural hero series, and that was with the Vancouver Public Library, Mabel Elmore's office, the consulate, Migrante, Barangay Kensington, and so we would talk about Jose Rizal, we would talk about Gabriela, Lapu Lapu, like who are the heroes of the Philippines that we should know about, and Two Lion actually did like 2 years in a row at Trout Lake, called Bayanihan, the Bayanihan Festival. And it was, again, a mini Filipino Independence Day that kind of emulated what we used to have at Plaza of Nations. But we just had, tinikling, the hip-hop dancers, we had some taho, we had the pabitin, like the games for the kids, and just kind of having the culture kind of introduced in the mainstream setting. Because, again, Trout Lake didn't have that from before, and it was amazing where a lot of Filipino parents, it was their first introduction to their kids to show them tinikling. We even did baybayin, where we got the folks to get their kids' names in baybayin in traditional Filipino writing. And a lot of them were just for fun. Like, we volunteered and did that because we wanted that for ourselves and our kids. And with little money and just lots of, like, donations, or even, like, we just started really looking at grants. And I think that was the issue, too, is that there was so much money in the community, like, in the cities, that we were not tapping into. Because we never really learned, or we just never really had a chance to, like, again, have the time to do it, because we're skipping processes. Yeah. So what else is there?
Well, I think a lot of this experience has really, all surrounded by like culture and the need for cultural spaces and your involvement in really pushing for that cultural space, like an official one. Can I ask what it's been like to advocate for and like work towards like a Filipino cultural center like in Vancouver? Like that, I know that's like a lot of labor and a lot of, it's very intense. So what has that been like for you?
It's I could say that because of my experience in the community, and it's no secret that I have been a campaigner as well in regards to talking to all levels of government about it. For me, it's, I know the community has tried, like, over the past 50 years, even before I've gotten here. And as a youth, you kind of hear about it, you never really tried to pay attention to it because you didn't want to get involved. And, when it was about 2 years ago, or even before that, when NPC3 asked me to do their community consultations, I was just like, okay, like, yeah, I'm already talking to all these community leaders. Let's, like, ask the questions. And it was just that strive, that need and the desire for a cultural center, because we use a lot of the other centers for our programming, but it's not our own. And we do see other cities that have their own. And so, the main thing is, like, why not? Like, why can't we get there? Like, what's the procedure and the process to get a cultural center, And I know it's a long process and there's a lot of hoops to jump, if anything. But there just hasn't been an organization that is solely dedicated to doing just that, because all of the nonprofits for Filipinos, whether they're associations or not, are all volunteer efforts. And everybody ends up growing up, like, having to live their lives, like, and it's totally understandable because they got to pay their bills, they got kids to raise, they got school to go to, and they need to be able to set them up first. And our community is still very young in Canada. And like I said, our immigration story is different. Whether there have been Filipinos here since the 1970s, or there have been Filipinos since the 1800s, but, like, even just recently there was an article that came out with Benson Flores, having to be in Bowen Island in the 1800s, but it's like we're only learning about that now. So there is lack of documentation for the things that have happened, and even for the cultural center that was to be built in the 90s. like all people say is, yes, money was missing, or we did have property, but nobody really knows like what actually happened. And so all I say is that we do have to learn from our past, and we do want to move forward. And, you know, I feel that our community is still very traumatized and hurt from that. And that's all they go back to. And it's really hard to always gain people's trust when you've been hurt. And all you can do is just prove that you won't do that, or just prove to the community and others that you are better, or our community is striving to do better. And it's going to take a lot. And there's still lots of work to be done, but the community is super excited. Like, there's excitement in the air that this could actually happen. It's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to happen with just one person. We totally need like everybody to be involved, and to be involved in the process. Yeah.
And what's something that, like, what keeps you going, like, when you're, you know, doing this very intense community work, whether that be, have been with Tulayan, with COVID-19, like with C19, with Mabuhay House, like, what really motivates you from, like...
Oh, now I'm gonna cry. I was doing so good.
Yeah, that's okay. We can also take a break.
No, it's good. This is a good cry.
Yeah.
I always say, like, my why is my son, you know? And so with him, like, just having him to have access to the things that I didn't have growing up is a why. And even with meeting all of the youth that I've worked with from the past, like, I hear their struggles and I hear their stories. And even when I ran myself as a political person, I ran for park board in 2014. You know, as a youth worker, you're like, you know, be whatever you want to be, you know, you motivate them and you tell them to reach for the top. But then when they tell you, like, you know, how can I be what I want to be when I don't see those people? I don't see brown faces. And so for me, I'm just like, oh my gosh, they're right. You know, that was kind of like my push of being like, I need to lead by example. I need to do the things that I say, so these youth can actually believe me, but also see. And so even for the things that are happening with our first Filipina MP in government, is just like, holy cow, wow, like, it's in our lifetime, it's happened. And so my thing too is that I do get a lot of slack about you know, not being able to take care of myself first, and I do have to check myself. I think the motivation is knowing that I can take a break, or I can step back a little bit, because there's other people that have my vision and that movement, you know, because I have talked to other leaders and other leaders' kids that have kind of told me their experience of, like, trying to get things done, and kind of just saying, like, you know, watch out, be careful, especially with friends and relationships, you know, because you do lose relationships, but you do gain more relationships. And I think the motivation is literally, like, I don't see that I'm doing anything wrong, and I'm doing this for the better, for the community. And it is just leaving a legacy for my family and for myself. But it's always knowing that there's you can always do better the next day. Like, I think the motivation is that in this lifetime, like, I want to be able to do the best that I can, and then whatever happens afterwards is it is what it is, right? I think because, you know, I just come from, you know, a single parent family home, and just always having to work, I'm really starting to work, or have been wanting and trying to work smarter with the community around me. And there's still lots to learn. Like, I'm 40 years old, but there's still a long way to go in regards to building community, and just being a mom myself, and just being Filipino in Canada. Because there's always that thing, is that you feel that you're not Filipino enough, and then you're not Canadian enough. And I think that happens in every community. And so there's just a uniqueness to our community as well.
So I think for the rest of the interview, I want to focus more on like the focus of this project, which is Kwentong Pamamahay, so like homemaking. So like you've been here for quite some time, and I'm curious, like this is a very open-ended question, like how do you define home for you?
Oh gosh, love and family. I think, you know, when you talk to a lot of the moms that are here without their children, like, there's so much, like, love that goes into the work that they're doing, but knowing that they have to leave their family.
Yeah.
I mean, you talk to them, you listen to them, and then I just remember the time too, like in the early 2000s, like people would spend so much money on like cards, you know, like the long distance cards and stuff.
Yeah.
And just constantly on the phone. Like that's why Filipinos are so high tech. It's like so amazing. There was this really awesome like Google commercial that was like so good because it was just like keeping families connected via the internet, you know? And I think, you know, when they say home is where the heart is, and I truly believe that because no matter how like distant people are, like you could always see that connection. And I think that's why like during Mother's Day, I always think of the moms that are here without their kids, because it's like, you know, we celebrate and we take advantage of the fact that like we are here with our kids and family. But with the overseas workers, when they're just away from their families, like, you know, how do, like, I think about that. I think about what is home to them because they're so divided. They have a home there, they have a home here. And because of the economic situation in the Philippines, they're having to choose where they can make their money. And so home is anywhere you make it, you know, and I really think it's the family values. And I think that's why it's so important with our cultural heritage, you know, and to think about it, I think that's why I always want to promote the Filipino restaurants and the events, because it is like home. It reminds them of the Philippines to kind of to show that you're not alone and that we're here with you. And so when you think about it, you know, the Filipino Cultural Center, when it happens, it's bigger than just a physical building. And it means so much to the entire community in the Philippines and here to call home. And I think, that's actually a good segue of like calling a place home, because that's all we want to do is to create a place that is intergenerational, that is intercultural, that is a safe space for all Filipinos, you know, whether you're, regardless of your gender, race, region, political views, is to just kind of have that common ground and safe space. What was the question again?
No, that was the question. The question is, how do you define home? And you've already kind of like touched about like places in like Vancouver, and like the place that we will be getting in the future. But right now, are there any places in Vancouver that you consider home? It could be multiple places. It could be one. It could be none. Also,
like a home. Well, again, you know, Joyce Collingwood area is of course home. You know, where we gather. I mean, as I mentioned to you, that Joyce Collingwood Neighborhood House has a special place in my heart because of the fact that this is where I started doing my hip hop dance classes and where we'd gather at the basketball courts and all that. But with BC, with Vancouver, like you truly do see Filipinos everywhere, and so, you know, I don't know if it's corny or just the fact is when I see these, you know, Filipino faces, like that is home to me, to be like, you know, a place where we have called our home. And there's still lots of people who aren't aware of things, you know. If I was to say, oh, home is Filipino Plaza, which is underneath the Nanaimo SkyTrain station, not a lot of the Filipinos even know the significance of that place. But that is home.
Is that Plaza of Nations that you're talking
No,
about?
it's not even Plaza of Nations. This is the Filipino Plaza that the Translink gave to the community during the expo. And it's right underneath the Nanaimo SkyTrain station. And just recently, you know, a group, another nonprofit organization called United Filipino Canadian Associations of BC and the Rotary Club Mountain View, they've kind of fundraised and revitalized it with painting it, doing the gardening, all volunteers. And for the people who raised, you know, who donated money to that and that's taken care of, you know, it was only this year that they've kind of revitalized that, but they've been doing the flag raisings there every year. And so most Filipinos would call that home. But I guess really, you know, are you talking like landmarks then still?
It's up to you how you
I don't
want
know,
to
I'm just trying to
interpret
think.
it. Yeah, it's like for you, like for yourself, like what are places that you consider to be home in Vancouver? And you've talked about Joyce Collingwood, you've talked about Filipino faces, like it can really be whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I feel at home at all, like the places that that sell Filipino food, like the restaurants and like the stores. Like I consider those homes. Those end up acting as a cultural hub for us. You know, when I hear the TFC in the background, or when I hear the Tagalog speaking, you know, with the customers, like that's really home. I find. You know, when I'm gathered with like, I guess when I've gathered with all these festivals, I think that's why we're always so excited when, you know, June Filipino Heritage Month comes along, or now that we don't even have to wait till June. There's literally something happening every month to celebrate our culture. So I would say home is at these festivals and at these events that happen.
Yeah. And would you say there's been such an increase from since you've
definitely
immigrated?
Yeah. It's definitely relieves the pressure of having to produce an event because there's lack of it from back in the day. Because again, I felt that, you know, we were probably the only young group that was doing fundraisers or kind of having attention, giving attention to, like, let's say, fundraising efforts or whatnot. But there are a lot of great community leaders that have really rose the bar in regards to our community and culture, and getting out there in politics, as well as just having more voice in like media and mainstream media and platforms, I should say. Yeah. Even with like Filipino newscasters, like there is so much and so many more, you know, people that are brown in the media, which I would have never seen from back in the day. You know, not just Filipino, but just literally brown faces.
Yeah, just like that representation in all aspects of life. Physically, on the media, you know, in those interactions is really important.
Yeah, there was a movement that we did as well called Beyond Representation.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, do you remember that? And it was during COVID too. It was an online series where we just we couldn't physically get together, but we still wanted to gather, and we gathered on Zoom. I was a guest speaker in one of them, just talking about the importance of culture and heritage and just kind of keeping it alive in Canada, but the conversation's going. Like, I think the worst thing is just having the conversation stop. Like, if we don't talk about them, like our history, our heritage, it's going to be forgotten. So that's why I feel like documentation like this is super important. And it was so sad too when Tita Eri Maestro, who was our only Filipino librarian, retired during COVID, and she was the one that really led the series of Pinoy Storytime and did the VPL Pinoy Storytime. And so when I've asked, I'm like, is there any more Filipino librarians? And we have none. There's no Filipino librarians anymore. And so with the Filipino books that are in the Vancouver Public Library, it's like we need to encourage our people to like take them out, because if they're not being used or taken out, what's going to happen to that section? You know, so how do we sustain that to kind of show them that it's needed? And I think that's why I keep on promoting people, or just asking people their stories on why do you think we need this cultural center, like, and to speak up about it, because of course everybody could say yes, we need it, but if the government doesn't hear it, or if the public doesn't hear it, and if we don't ask for it, we'll never get it. Yeah, so that's what like the importance of like being heard is all about too.
So some prompts I have.
Because that's the thing, I feel like, okay, the whole single mom thing too, like
Wait, do you want me to stop recording?
Oh, no, I'm just thinking out loud.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think about like how much of that, because a lot of that work went into that too, about like fighting for like dental care.
I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit, if you know about your family's immigration journey. So like specifically like how your family ended up
in Winnipeg?
In Winnipeg, and what terms, if you had family there. Just curious about your family situation here.
Yeah. So my mom's, she actually came to went to Winnipeg when she was 16 with her parents. And so it was her older sister, Tita Yoli, that sponsored them as a family. So what's interesting about my mom's immigration story is that when she came as a 16-year-old, she didn't continue high school. She went straight to work. And so I always reflect on that, because she worked at a hotel, dishwasher, didn't go to school. And so when I became a youth settlement worker, I kind of always think about that. I'm just like, you know, if she had gone to school or even met a youth settlement worker to tell her that she should graduate high school, you know, the things would have changed. But I think that's where I kind of attribute to being a youth settlement worker, because, you know, it's like kind of funny. It's like, what if I met my 16-year-old mom? You know what I mean? Like, and that's why I take so much pride in meeting these youth of today, because there's so much potential of where they could take their education or their careers. So my mom actually, her mom actually had a stroke early on in her life too, and so she ended up having my Lola Banang had to go back to the Philippines. And just she ended up staying there. So she kind of didn't grow up with her mom, because she ended up having to just stay in Winnipeg to work. So it was my Lolo, like her dad, and my mom with her other sister Nelia. I believe she was in Winnipeg, yeah. And then family, basically. And so hence going back and forth to see her own mom in the Philippines. For my dad-wise, like my mom and dad met in Winnipeg already, and my dad, I believe he immigrated when he was like 18, 19, and he worked. He grew up with his brothers, so there was like 5 of them that were in Winnipeg that survived. He had other brothers and siblings that passed away in the Philippines, but they met in their, I guess my mom is older than my dad, so they met when my mom was like 20. I don't even actually know, in their 20s. They got married in 1981, and then they had me in 1982.
Right away.
Yeah, that's what you get. Yeah.
And so when they were in Winnipeg, did you have any extended family there, or was it just?
Yeah, no, my dad had his brothers there, and again, all of them worked for this company called Varda Batteries, is where all the Filipinos worked. And so when that company shut down and they laid off like a lot of people, it was basically the whole Filipino community that had to really find new jobs or whatnot. And then my mom's family was there too. There were still lots in the Philippines, but there was 2 sisters, and the sister Yolanda, who sponsored my mom, ended up moving to Vancouver, and so that's why when when my dad got laid off, we decided to move to Vancouver to follow. So that's why at least we had one sister. My mom had one sister there.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned that your mom like ended up working 2 full-time jobs.
Oh, both my mom and dad.
Yeah.
Like coming to Vancouver, obviously the cost of living was was higher than Winnipeg, and so they both, like my mom worked for VGH at the hospital as like a kitchen aide, and then she also worked for Canadian Airlines at the time, and then my dad worked at Children's Hospital, and then worked at Canadian Airlines as well. And so raising 3 kids was really a juggle, and luckily we did have my Lolo Pablo, who was with us to take care of us during those times, and he lived with us, so that was helpful.
What was it like living or like being raised by your Lolo?
Ooh, good question. More waterworks. I think like again the Tagalog, like that's where really, that we. He spoke English, but obviously Tagalog was the main language that he communicated in, and we wanted to make sure that we understood each other. I think it was a real privilege to to be raised by him, and it really connected me with the Filipino-ness of it, because we would live here, he would live with us here, and it was limited, and he was the one that was always going to the Filipino senior club. So I remember more in Winnipeg because he like lived there, he knew all the people there, he was very connected in the seniors dances. In Vancouver, like he went a little bit but not as much because he wasn't as home, because it was a new city for him, and I guess he was a little bit older, so he didn't go as much. But I knew like I remember specifically like going to Winnipeg, and he would be like, both my grandparents actually would be like the superstars of like the Filipino senior clubs. And I think maybe that's where I have such a soft heart for Filipino seniors because of him. Because you see the joy, like they do the things that they did in the Philippines where they have those pageants and, the Miss December. And, they just want to dance and have fun and all that stuff. And I think, again, I'm so happy that my parents are still alive, that my son gets to be raised by them too. And I think, there's a lot of us Filipino Canadians that are using their parents as caregivers, and again, there's always the good, the bad, and the ugly, but it's always just like realizing the time that we have with our parents to get those histories, because the food that they cook, we don't really retain it as much. So it's like once that generation is gone, it's kind of like, where are those recipes? Are they documented? Did we really take the time to learn those things? And sometimes we do take advantage of it. We take advantage of it that we didn't get to spend as much time with family. And I think, as my son is growing up, he's like, going to turn 8 now. And just seeing him interact. I mean, I have so many plans. Like I plan to still have like a children's book with like a Tagalog English children's book talking about him and his Lola and stuff. And they want to start a YouTube channel, like all these things. And I think just, making those memories are so important and everything. And even when I'm in the wedding industry, before COVID, my son would actually go back to the Philippines with his Lola for a month just because we would be so busy. And so I'm happy that he's able to experience the Philippines without me and kind of build his own memories with his, Filipino cousins and everything. So I was really close to my grandfather, and mind you, that's why he's named after, why I named Pablo after him. But there are, and I do know a lot of seniors who don't have family here, that don't get that family support. So that's what I also think about too. Yeah.
Oh.